if your goal is to sit around and you say, I want to get into the cannabis industry so I can smoke marijuana and smoke cannabis all day, and have fun, it is not the industry for you.
This is the Vance Crowe Podcast.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm glad you're here. This week's interview, I have been waiting weeks and weeks to get him on the show. His name is Tony Sansone, and he is the first person I've ever known, and probably one of the few people in the world that have ever started a recreational cannabis company and then sold it for $22 million. And as soon as you see Tony Sansone III, you realize this is a very young guy to have done such a big amount of business. He is a really interesting character. He can talk all about literature and business, and he has a very interesting take on the world. And you will find out really quickly in the interview that even though he started this company, he does not drink or smoke or use recreational drugs in any way. And it makes him an interesting character in this world of cannabis as a totally new industry is coming about. So this is a fascinating interview. Before I get started, I wanted to give a little bit of a shout out to my friends at Farm Hats. This is a group of guys started with Kent Blunier and a few other key members that decided agriculture did not do a good job of showing all of the different types of work or the different types of hats that farmers wear. And so they created a Facebook page that shows, hey, today I'm shoveling out the hog barns, or tomorrow I'm going to be driving on the grain elevator and to the grain elevator. And then other days I'm working on accounting. So if you ever want to see an interesting view of agriculture that is away from kind of the propagandistic commercials, go check out Farm Hats. Until then, why don't you sit down, buckle in, and enjoy this interview with one of the most intriguing entrepreneurs out there today, Tony Sansone III. Tony Sansone III, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Vance. Hey, now.
It's great to see you. I've only seen you, one time since we made a journey out to visit you in Las Vegas, Nevada.
That's correct.
And I made that journey because your dad, who has been a great friend to me, heard that I was interested in understanding the cannabis business, and you had been running a business out there. So he said, if you get out and see my son, he'll show you around. And so that is how you and I met, and I got to see a giant building filled with cannabis plants. Why don't you start off by telling what in the heck were you doing out in Las Vegas, and what did we see when we were out there?
So this, when you came out to visit, what you saw was a fully operational cultivation facility based in North Las Vegas, Nevada. So I'll kind of give you the backstory here. My father and I, with a group of our partners, invested in a cultivation license out in Las Vegas. We bought that secondhand on the market, and with a group of operating partners. So this was in February 2016, and from there we built out a fully operational cultivation facility that was 30,000 square feet. Produces now about 1,000 pounds of cannabis per month. Flash forward, once we built that, we sold it in August of 2018 to a publicly traded company, and knock on wood, did fairly well on the investment. And so that's what you saw.
So you're completely out of that business now?
Out of that specific operation, we are. Yeah, we sold out to a company called M. Hardeen. They're one of the larger groups out there. They're publicly traded on the Canadian Stock Exchange, and it's public information. They bought it from us for and our general operating partners in August 2018 for $22 million. So it was So we're out of that.
And so how much did it cost? You said you bought a license on the secondary market, meaning somebody got in line, got the license, and then said, I think it's worth this much. Can you say how much you paid for that?
I would. It's. I prefer not to, but it was. It was a significant investment, but probably not as much as some people think.
Was it more to get the license or to do the work, to put the building
by far
together?
More to do the work.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, the building itself was that's really so.
But people, like, you know what, like, because most of the listeners will have never seen a cannabis grow operation. They particularly have never seen one in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
So the crazy thing that happened when we went out there, we landed in a plane. I was there with a couple of friends, and we stopped off at the hotel, and then we came out to see you. And when we have this rental car, you're driving out into the middle of nowhere, and it's just industrial parks where you have building after building that look like, I don't know, they could be storage closets. They could just be, they're completely nondescript concrete buildings. You come inside of a fenced area, and all I see is a wall that there's a door, but it's got a clear mechanism on that's locking it. I knock on the door, and that's when you and I meet. Once we're in the building, what do people see?
It's pretty remarkable. It's, if you can imagine something, what you would see in the movies, like in a James Bond movie, like this giant bank vault. That's really what it's like. The walls are incredibly thick concrete. You've got security cameras everywhere, and you go in, and there's this. There's some technical terms, but you've got the dry rooms, cutting rooms. You're in this hallway, concrete walls. And then there's another steel door. We put on our booties. You've got to put on basically what looks like a hazmat suit. And you put on your booties, your like a hairnet, and face mask. And then you open this second door, and you just see, rows, basically as far back as
the first room that we went into, your eyes are immediately caught off guard because there's these really intense growing lights,
right? And
these are all baby cannabis plants, which was hilarious because you see cannabis plants on TV when the feds are pulling them up and they're showing B-roll of it, but then you walk into this room and these are all really well lit, individually potted, baby cannabis plants, the characteristic leaves. And what is going on in that building? You have special people in that room that are extremely good at breeding. What are they doing?
So you're doing everything basically from the tiniest plant to growing it to harvest. Everything is being done in that facility.
All the way from seed. You start from seed?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's, you've got, and it's a pretty remarkable process. And you see the thing that always blows my mind is, from what prior to being in this industry to being in it now, you see the sophistication changing by the day. And as you can see by the operation, and that really, I don't want to take credit for that. That really goes to our operating partners who've been in this industry, since it started in Colorado.
What are their names?
That was a group called F&L Investments, and two of the founders were also the founders of a company of M. Hardeen, and M. Hardeen they're the publicly traded company that ended up buying the entire operation. M. Hardeen specializes in, basically, think of them as like a management company. A good example would be like a Marriott. You put the Marriott flag on a piece of property and they manage and operate it. This is essentially,
they tell you follow these rules and we'll let you keep on whatever money you make. Yeah, we'll do it together.
And that was really sort of the impetus behind all this, is that when we got into this, I know we're kind of getting away from what
we're good, man.
Yeah,
it's good.
It's and this is the stuff that particularly interests me. My father, especially my father, I have to give him excuse me, a good deal of credit on this, is that whenever we look at something, especially outside of
the St. Louis area,
and his comfort zone, you really want to align with the best partners you can. I've seen a lot of people make a lot of mistakes, because they've been really successful in one industry, automatically think that can translate into another. There was you probably saw this because I know you read this, and a great article that came out in Harvard Business Review. They were talking about leadership, and it was a pretty large scale study. And what they found is that leadership is not one of these, the Steve Jobs, those types are sort of the exception to the rule. But a lot of great leaders have a real specific technical expertise in their industry, and they also have that sort of leadership skill, and it doesn't necessarily translate into another industry. And so technical expertise absolutely matters. And especially in an industry like cannabis, it's vitally important. It can't be underestimated.
Well, so, just even going back into the small growing room that we're talking about, just outside of that room is sophisticated water fertilizing system where there are individuals that are outside that are filling it up, getting the exact right nutrients there, and then whatever the computer deems is the right thing for the plants, then they all work together, put it on a schedule, and it's spraying and it's light for a certain amount of time. So when you get there, it is not like growing weed in your closet.
Right.
This is like if you were going to do it so that you could get the absolute best return on investment, and grow the highest quality thing that you could. And there are real controls there, right? Like you were very serious about, we do not want fungus in here. We don't want insects. What goes on? What are you protecting? How does it grow?
Well, the product itself is, in terms of, you've got to cut a number of different things here at work. You've got to be extremely careful from, and this is less of a problem in places like Las Vegas, but you've got parasites, dust mites. Dust mites is the big one. And if your harvest, I have a friend, I'll give you an example, who has an outdoor, and he's an incredibly sophisticated farmer. He's got an outdoor grow in Colorado. And it's one of the largest outdoor grows I've seen. And because it's subject to the elements, and you may know this, that Colorado had one of their coldest winters ever recently, one of their heaviest snowfalls. His entire crop froze.
Oh.
And he was done. And he was able to salvage it, convert things into oils and process it. But in terms of actual flower product, he was done. When you're indoors and you're in a highly, highly regulated new market like Nevada, you could, in our facility there, I still call it our facility. You saw it. The floors there, you could eat ice cream off the floors there.
Yeah.
They were, in terms of the regulations involved in the testing, you can't have any mistakes, not one.
Yeah, no residues of chemicals. If you have the fungus on there, and the interesting thing. So you come at this from the business angle. And one of the things that you were teaching me when we were out there was a lot of people made mistakes because they bought the highest end equipment they could. They were ready to pour as much money as they possibly could, and they entered too much supply into the market.
Yeah.
And so you guys actually jumped on that curve, right? Like after people slammed into the wall because they were going too fast and they produced too much. Isn't that right?
That's absolutely right. And again, I don't want to take credit for this. This was something that we had a pretty heavy debate about. And this is where having good partners is essential in letting operators do what they do best. The impulse is always is to move, is to act. And for most people, and especially if you're an entrepreneur, it can be to act. And oftentimes you're better taking a second to think. And we took some time to think about it, and we decided to hold off. And that was really a credit to our...
So describe this. You're saying there were other people that could start growing at one point.
We could have started growing. So, from day one, the question is once recreational passed, so I should step back here. Recreational passed. This was recreational cannabis. So where you could, anyone at 21 or older in the state of Nevada can go and buy cannabis for recreational purposes. For a lot of places, if you're in a medical market versus a recreational market, the difference is pretty extreme in the sense of that's the difference between a viable business and a non-viable business. There are exceptions. Arizona is a medical state, and this is I'm speaking solely on the business end of things. And it's a very viable market for everyone, for patients, for caregivers, and for operators. And that's a good thing, in my opinion. Nevada is structured in such a way, it's a great state, that, the market in terms of it working really kind of depends on a recreational model. And so when recreational passed, people said, we've got to get up and running now. We've got to start producing. What they didn't take into consideration, and a lot of these people, you can't blame them, didn't have experience in the industry. And that gets into a whole other issue with this industry. And the impulse was, we've got to get our product out there. We've got to spend whatever it takes to get it out there. The problem with that is that when you're in a highly regulated industry and the rules and regs are still being pushed out, if you've got a full harvest ready to go, but it hasn't, the rules and regs haven't caught up with this,
people start stockpiling,
and then you're done because you're not, your harvest can go bad, and then you're sitting on it. You have to run these facilities basically 24 hours.
Oh, so you're making payments to the employees that are working there, the electric that you're using, all this stuff, and you're not getting any return.
Yeah.
So if you didn't have a war chest that would allow you to outlast the pent up supply, people tanked.
Yeah. So there's a group out there that I'm thinking of. They had a similar size operation to ours, and their investment, it resulted in a permanent loss of capital. Their investment went to zero because that
had to blow people's minds because, it's like, hey, this is a new market. This is a new product. Everybody wants it. The demand is going to be unlimited. And then to have to go back to your shareholders or whoever invested and be like, not only are we no longer in business, we aren't going to be able to give you your money back.
Yeah, you're done. And this gets into one of the biggest myths about this industry is that it truly is comparable in a lot of ways to the gold rush. It is not. The joke is, how do you make a small fortune in cannabis and start with a large fortune? And because
sounds like farming in general.
Exactly. And that's a very apt comparison because that's really, especially on the cultivation side, that's really
because it is farming. Yeah, it is. Yeah,
you're essentially what you're looking at, and you have to see. I don't have that. My interest in the industry, and I'm pretty open about this. I lean libertarian. I don't drink. I don't use recreational drugs. But
do you consider cannabis a recreational drug?
Sure.
So do you use cannabis?
I do not.
So have you ever?
I have never used cannabis, and I almost hesitate to say that because people don't believe me, but it's the truth. It's
funny because we've definitely hit a culture change where the more awkward laugh is, no, I actually haven't, as opposed to, I've smoked weed.
Yeah. And I mean, listen, I have no issue with it. I mean, I'm in the business. I would say it if I did, but it's
so why not? Why haven't you?
The reason, I don't drink. I don't use any recreational drugs, and I stopped. I stopped drinking shortly after my mother passed away when I was in high school. And
how old were you?
I was 17.
And what happened?
For me, my choice to stop drinking was really to kind of focus on my own life. I mean, I experimented with alcohol, and it was. But for me, there's a history on my mother's side of the family of depression and things like that. It was really, if I want to live the best life I can, I've got to take. For me personally, I don't use any substances.
So how old were you when you quit drinking?
I was 18.
I mean, that takes a tremendous amount of discipline because there's that allure, like just try something.
Sure.
I mean, it could be fun, and yet you've passed it up. It doesn't sound like you're regretting it.
No, not at all. No, and this is the way I look at it: is that, and this is not, and listen, I'm economically, I have an economic interest in this industry, so take it for what it's worth. But I think I'm being honest when I say this. Is that, my father. My father loves wine. He collects wine. My father is, that's great. There are some people, though, that, just like diabetes, that can't, they have a different reaction, physiological, psychological reaction to things like alcohol, things, to cannabis that is different from the average person. And life in general is far more complex, I think, than we want to admit it is. I mean, I know people that use cannabis and couldn't be more efficient or productive. I'm thinking of one individual who's actually in the industry, uses cannabis semi-regularly. He's done 7 Ironman competitions. I think he gets up at 4 a.m., goes to bed at 11, and runs an absolutely incredibly successful business and has a great family life. I know other people, and I'm sure you do too, that smoke cannabis all day and accomplish nothing.
Yeah. I mean, I think alcohol is the one that people don't have real conversations about. And I think that most people that are energetic and high energy and like to get things done also do that same thing when they start doing stuff like drinking alcohol. I mean, I think for me, that would be a great example. And then the next day, it's not like I threw up everywhere and I lost control and said insane things. No, I wake up the next day and my day is 20% as valuable as it could be. And when you're in your 20s, it's okay to throw off a couple 20% days. You get into your 30s, you lose a day, you lose a Sunday. That's either time with your family that you could have really enjoyed, or it's time that you could have been getting after it. And it's interesting because alcohol is one of those things that I think most people, even if they don't have a chemical dependence on it, the social dependence on it is so strong that they don't even consider that they could actually live life without it. And so it's astounding to me that since you were 18, you've not had that dragging on your shoulder.
I mean, well, I appreciate that. It's, what can I say? I'm fortunate. And it was also, and I think part of it is because it happened. I didn't have this because it happened when I was 18. It stopped when I was 18. I didn't have this history, like 20-year history of, I didn't go to bars. I mean, I was 18 years old. I went to a Catholic boys' high school. I wasn't going to bars or anything like that. I didn't have that social experience, social conditioning of this is how I socialize. And, so when you think about it, I mean, I guess I started experimenting with alcohol when I was 14. And by 18, I haven't had a drink since I was 18 years old. So I don't have, it's this tiny window.
I mean, it's amazing. And I think that probably speaks to why, you were a difficult guy to get on the podcast because you are one of the busiest human beings I know. You're not even always in St. Louis. No. You're running around doing all kinds of things. Yeah. What do you do with all this time that you have that's productive?
So I spend, in terms of my working day, I've got a new company with a partner he's out of Dallas, Texas. He's been a very, very successful entrepreneur, has a couple of IPOs himself. And we've got a business where we provide access to debt capital for operators in the cannabis industry. And because
what is debt capital?
Like traditional bank financing. So the equity versus debt capital, most of the industry now is in the private sector. Or privately held companies rather, is most of the capital in that now is equity capital. So if you want to start a vertically integrated cannabis operation in Los Angeles, California, and so you've got a cultivation, manufacturing, and dispensary. You're going to say that's going to cost me, I'm just making up numbers here. It's going to cost me $10 million. You can't go to, you can't go to Wells Fargo and say, hey, I need.
Yeah, the banks won't touch it. Yeah, they won't touch it. And so you have figured out. So this is interesting because banks, they know that the opportunity is there. When was the last time a completely new industry just rolled into the world where demand was? It's like discovering Apple computers or just computers in general and then saying, well, the banking rules aren't clear, so none of the banks are going to do that. So all of that capital that is tied up in banks, how many people are out there doing what you guys are doing? There's
some, but there's not a ton. And the issue, the big is finding the source of the capital and then connecting them with the right people. Because this is a fascinating industry in the sense that it's one of the oldest products in the world that people have used on a regular basis that hasn't been effectively branded yet. And it's in this weird sort of legal state. I think it's, basically if you go to any business school or any, public policy, you go to public policy institution, there's a path towards, a legalization for cannabis. I don't know what exactly that's going to look like. We can get into that later. But I don't think that there's any debate about this, the public acceptance of this product. I mean, if you look at polling, the public's sort of overwhelmingly in support, not only of medical.
It's a question of, are they going to get it done before this presidential election, or will it be a promise that everybody will make by the next one? But that's it.
Yeah. And it's a very funny thing. So I have a friend at the Brookings Institution who writes specifically about cannabis policy. And he mentioned something that was really, really interesting, because people said, well, if all these people support it, why hasn't it been federally legal? And he mentioned this is why social science is really fascinating. He said, when you ask people if they support it, whether it's medical or recreational, they say, yeah, usually. For the majority of people say yes. But when you ask people, what are the top 20 issues that concern you as an American? Cannabis doesn't fall in there. In general, when you poll people, it's healthcare, it's the big things we see on the news every day. And cannabis ends up on the news because it's got this allure to it. But when you ask people what's really, really important to them, like the top 20 issues, I think that's what he said. I think it's top 20, either that or top 10. It doesn't fall in there.
But don't you think if there were a president running on day one of my presidency, recreational, federally legal, and all of the banks can get in on this game, that they would have tremendous support for that? I
don't know, to be honest with you. I think, do I think it moves the needle? Is it a place for them to plant a flag to really to make that a successful campaign? I'm not sure about that. And that's a really honest answer. It's important to me.
Yeah, maybe. Well, and I also wonder if the fact that it's gone state by state hasn't been better for figuring out what's the right way to do this.
It's exactly.
You get to start a bunch of little incubators and see which one did it well and which one screwed it up.
So I'll give you pull back the curtain here a little bit. And this is not anything super secretive, but for people outside the industry, it can be something of a surprise. The notion that everyone in this industry wants there to be federal legality.
Yeah, they're not thinking about the game.
It's not accurate, because one of the conversations we had early on, when we just made our investment, when we talked with some people that had already been successful and had already made significant investments, and turns out, so this was November of 2016, November 2016. In talking to some people, they suggested, hey, so you've got an operation, Nevada, you've got a decent sized grow facility. I'm thinking one person specific who said this. He said, I've got 1 million square feet of outdoor grow space in California, and I'm growing at X dollars per pound. You're growing at 5X per pound. If this product becomes federally legal and there's no interstate commerce,
then his grow is gone.
No, my grow is gone, because I'm growing at 5. He's got 1 million square feet of outdoor grow space. I'm growing at, my cost is 5 times. It's actually over 5 times what his are.
Oh, I didn't realize you were saying the cost of it. I was thinking the productivity of it.
No,
so
the cost.
Oh, then you're dead, and then he goes to open.
Yeah, because then I can ship. I can ship over state lines.
And then you just start having, where are the best growing conditions in the United States, or really in the world?
Yeah.
Right? Because as soon as the U.S. does it, there's going to be very, very few warm climate. What countries would be producing the most marijuana?
I've heard Colombia, was the one that's being mentioned.
But if you opened up legalization, would it go to Africa? Would it go to, on the same latitude of...
You have other concerns in Africa. You've got geopolitical concerns as well. The stability concerns I think you would have. But, I don't see why not. Essentially, the way to think of this, and we kind of started with this, is I don't have that connection. I'm interested in legalization for a couple of reasons. For the social impact, social justice reasons, as well as, for my own economic interest. And I'm unabashedly... pro market economy. I believe in market economies and in what they do, not just, from an economic impact, but also for the social impact.
So let's talk about the social impact, because you were out in Las Vegas as this became recreationally legal. I have a good friend that when we were talking about legalization, he got really upset. And this is a free market capitalist guy. This is a guy that has built a great business. He's taught me a ton. And then we were talking one day about what happens if they do legalization. And this was actually a few years ago. So it was not obvious that legalization was going to happen. And he said, I think that's the worst thing that could happen to society. I think we will turn into Pottersville. What do you think? Do you turn into Pottersville? Did Las Vegas go down? I mean, Las Vegas isn't really a fair comparison because that's Sin City, you know? But do you think the other places that have allowed recreational, are there a lot more vagrants and...
It's quite the opposite, actually. And this is the thing. And I respect that opinion. And listen, you're talking to somebody who doesn't drink alcohol and doesn't use recreational drugs. And it's and they've done some studies on this, and again, you could sort of get studies to say what you want, but there hasn't been anything, I haven't seen anything that's refuted these yet, is that cannabis use doesn't increase in recreational markets.
Meaning that everybody that's going to go buy it legal is already buying it illegally?
And this is the funny thing, is that for the people that get into, just on the business side of things, you're competing with the black market. I mean, that black, that's a concern, even in a city. That was part of why we chose Las Vegas, is because you're essentially operating on the tourism model. And we think pretty, and I like to believe I do, I think pretty deeply and seriously about every investment that I make, which isn't many. And part of the appeal of Nevada and Las Vegas is that you're dealing with, upwards of 50 million tourists a year that don't have established black market contacts.
Yeah, and they want to come out and they're having a great time and they're on vacation. So this is going to be a great place. And if you can, then you can turn it really not into a commodity as much as let me give them an experience. You can sell all kinds of add-ons.
Sure, and that's really the. But there's a black market in Las Vegas. We found that out.
Trying to avoid the taxes on it?
Yeah, and just simply because, and this is the weird voodoo of this industry, and the difference between a viable market and a non-viable market, is that if you issue and I'm talking on the business side of things, if you issue far too many licenses, or you do, basically an open system where if you want a license, you can get one to open up a dispensary or cultivation, it's essentially perfect competition. And in perfect competition, all profits get competed away. It's great for consumers.
Great for the consumer, right? That's what you want. Less monopolies, more competition.
Exactly.
Right.
The problem when you make it a monopoly is that, and this can be hard for people, in business that are getting into this new industry, is they don't take into account. I mean, if you produce candy, if you produce Starburst, or you're part of the Mars Corporation, you're not thinking of somebody on the street selling black market Skittles, because you've got the brand built around it. But if you're in cannabis, you've got to think about the fact that you've got taxes, you've got water and power,
You got to go through regulation. You got to get your stuff tested. Sometimes it's not going to pass. So then you have to take it to oil when the flower was the most valuable thing.
So if the black market is essentially kind of close to the same product, in terms of quality, and it's 50% cheaper, people are going to go to the black market.
And do you foresee that it'll be like treated like black market pharmaceuticals at some point? Like if I was making Sudafed D in my factory, in my warehouse, the government's going to show up, kick the door down, and be like, "Whoa, you're not doing that here." Will that happen with cannabis?
Yeah, it's tough to say because this is why things are. When we were talking about this earlier, life is as I get older, I realize much about life, none of it is really black and white, and what applies in situation A doesn't necessarily apply in situation B, because there's this cultural exchange happening now where as we're becoming more open to cannabis, I mean, if you look at the statistics about baby boomers and their interest, I mean, it's sort of remarkable. That's the thing that always shocks me, is their openness to using cannabis. As that grows, so does the opposition to strict enforcement against the black market, and because and I'm all for this. I certainly don't think we should be locking people up for selling a dime bag. But as an operator, it does affect my business. If you've got people,
if I'm playing by the rules and they aren't, then
And so there's this weird balance, and I mean this sincerely. I just don't think. I mean, from a moral perspective, I don't. I have a tough time trying to, even though it hurts my bottom line, and advocating that these people, are arrested. And
I mean, this is good. It's great to be having an honest conversation about that, because too often what you see with people that believe that they are libertarians is they're libertarians right up until there's a chance that the government might write them a check or write down their debt or do whatever, enforce the rules on the other guy, and now it benefits them. And so it's like, well, yeah, I'm a libertarian, but I'm just playing by the rules here. It is refreshing to hear somebody say, like, I don't want people being arrested for this.
Yeah, and I don't. Now, do I think that? And I'm also one of these. When I say I lean libertarian, it's my sort of philosophical underpinning. I was thinking of Gary Johnson spoke at, I can't remember if it was the Libertarian Party convention, but it was. And
you're libertarian enough to go to the conventions.
Yeah, I'll go to those. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm libertarian enough. This is a funny thing because I end up arguing with everybody there. But he was saying, somebody asked him, do you think people should be required to have a driver's license? It's like, yeah, I think that's he got booed. So it's, that's not, I
mean, purists are always difficult. Yeah. The going back to what we were talking about with the incubations by having it state by state, and this goes along with my hypothesis that cities are actually the only place that you can live. You live in a state, but not really, right? Yeah. You live in one part of a state. Yeah. And so the fact that we have this federalist system, it feels like we want more and more government control, but in reality, what we want is more local control. Allows you to participate more fully. If you vote in an election, you have a much bigger sway in it. I think cities are the governance model of the distant future.
It's pretty, when you look, so take a state like California. You go to San Francisco, and then you go to San Diego. They may well be two different countries in terms of the cultural environment. There are parts of California that are so libertarian or so conservative that it's almost shocking to believe.
I mean, it is not that different from Texas.
Exactly.
Yeah, and particularly, I mean, I'm in the ag world, right? I'm going around and speaking with a lot of these groups, and if you think you could give the same speech in San Francisco that you could give in the Central Valley.
Exactly.
I mean, they're different things. People believe entirely different ideas. Their jokes are different.
Yeah.
You're totally right about them being different countries.
So your point is well taken. And this is the thing, and I have to, and I'm reading this fabulous book right now, and I assume most of your audience, if they're listening to you, probably reads a lot, and it's a book called Lee Kuan Yew, The Grandmaster's Insights on the United States, China. Lee Kuan Yew is the founder or the founding prime minister of Singapore. And
what great timing to read on that. Okay, yeah. Interesting.
His achievement, where he took a third world nation to the first world in a single generation, is unprecedented. What did he do that by it being a democracy? No. And this is what's interesting. Our federalist, there's something uniquely American about our federalist system that works. I think it works, and I love it. Does it translate, elsewhere? I mean, Singapore is this tiny nation where you're able to do that. We're, a big, massive nation. In this federalist system where you have a state by state, operating government, and
the closer you get to home, it should be more control as opposed to less.
It's my inclination.
I mean, the concept of school districts was actually a really brilliant idea. You get to teach your children about how the world works and what's important to them and their future based on your decisions, not somebody living in a state capital or a national, this is what we think they should learn nationally. The more that you have control over, what are your kids doing? How is your law enforcement being handled? What rules are most important to you? That is what makes one place better to live in than the other. And Singapore is it's a great example. Where do you want to start a business? In the place where there are the fewest rules to start businesses.
It's the whole thing, and the complexity. Again, we're back on complexity. It's just so. And I've heard this, and you and I have talked about things like that. So you being in the ag world, and where you have school districts in certain states that were against, teaching evolution, and they wanted stickers on, and how that, saying, well, this is a federalist system we want. And, that went to, what was it, Dover Kitzmiller? I can't remember, but where that went to the Supreme Court.
The Scopes monkey trials?
Yeah. And then there was the other one in recent, past 20 years, where they wanted to put a sticker on.
I remember that.
Just a theory.
Yep. And then they were talking all about Texas school boards and things like that. Yeah.
So it's really a fascinating topic because it's just so deep and so complex. But I would say I have to tend to agree with you that this federalist system, and even Ted Cruz, who's sort of unabashedly conservative, and I would not say a big supporter of the cannabis industry, said, this is why we have a federalist system. The people of Colorado, want to have recreational cannabis or medical cannabis. They should, that's up to them.
And it's a beautiful thing because you do get to see, is it Pottersville? And if it is Pottersville, was there something they did that was different than the other one?
That's incredibly interesting because it's not the variables in, there's this scientist I love. His name is Carl Giberson, and he's a professor of physics, and he also happens to be a religious believer. And he said the debate was about, he was having a debate with another guy who I really, really like named Michael Shermer, who runs...
Oh, yeah. Skeptics Magazine. Yeah, of course.
It was less of a debate, more of a conversation. And Michael Shermer was saying, well, I don't think theology is a real discipline, obviously. I'm speaking as him. Obviously, I'm an agnostic. And
you didn't say what,
that's what he was saying. And Giberson said, well, he's like, I think you have to look at the discipline itself and the complexity of it. And he said, this is Giberson speaking. He said, I'm a physicist. He says, I know more about he's like, we deal with simple problems. Doesn't seem like it. We know more about our discipline than the chemist. The chemists know more about their discipline than the biologists. And you made a joke. He said, by the time you get up to the economists, they know almost nothing.
This is, I totally agree with this, 100%.
That's what he was, and so you're right, this Pottersville thing, what the there's so many variables, and some of them, and there's many that are undetectable, that to draw a conclusion, a causal...
The thing about religion that I did not realize until a few years ago. So I grew up Catholic, and I actually had built a little reputation in my Sunday school, or CCD as they used to call it, that I knew all the Bible stories. And then I got to a certain age where I was like, those Bible stories are dumb, and I'm throwing them all out. You don't realize that whether or not there is a belief in God present in understanding those stories or hearing those stories, it is that those stories lasted thousands of years. And if they have made it this far, they have some meaning in them that you can derive something out of, and maybe you bring in at the time you need it some spiritual belief. Yeah. But maybe you don't. The stories in and of themselves are ancient wisdom that we shouldn't forget.
And it's pretty, when you talk about these stories surviving over, that's a remarkable achievement. And it's because, and if you accept evolution and you think that applies to ideas as well, which I tend to think it does. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense.
You're saying, just so for clarity, you're saying if you believe in evolution as genetic selection, and that's what brought us to being humans, you can also think of mimetic selection.
Exactly.
Which are the ideas that stood the test of time and actually probably got honed and made better and made better. I mean, whether you're talking about Christian stories or the Greek myths, which my friend Rob Long, good friend, Plantimals on Twitter, he pointed out to me something that blew my mind about the Greek and Roman gods is that each one of the gods is an emotion that can inhabit you.
So I have a friend, and my family had a small foundation at Washington University called the Center for Wellbeing, and the director of that is a very well-known psychiatrist, geneticist named C. Robert Cloninger, who said exactly that and uses the Greek myths when understanding patients, understanding personality. I mean, these are...
And, all of the gods had these dualities, right? Where it could be Dionysus, he's the life of the party. You want to be around him. but he's also a drunkard.
Yes.
And if you go too far in any one direction, that to me is deeply important. Just to remember that, like, just learning these stories allows you to see the world in this more complex, incredibly complex world. It allows you to boil it down to being like, how do I handle these situations?
Yeah. No, it's exactly right. And that's why I think that these stories are incredibly important. And when you look back, and there's a major focus now, and rightly so, on STEM fields, and the focus on being dedicated to the STEM fields. I have to say, someone who has a liberal arts education, the wisdom that I garnered from the Christian Bible, from the Greek myths, from Goethe. If you look at Faust, not to sound like a total nerd here, but the story of selling your soul in exchange for knowledge and power, you want to talk about timeless, it almost gives me chills. That's a story that applies, that everyone can relate to.
Well, 100%, right? Like, and what are you willing to give up? What is a good sacrifice to make, right? Because the people that get the furthest in life have the most discipline. Discipline is about making sacrifices for one period of time in order to achieve something larger. But you can make a sacrifice that makes none of it worthwhile, right? Like you go too far in one direction, and Faust being like, yeah, I'll give up my soul. What's the point of that? In order to have these other things that I wanted.
You familiar with a documentary called The Day After Trinity?
No.
Okay, I highly recommend it. It was on, I think you can find it on YouTube.
We'll put it in the show notes in the links.
Yeah, so. Okay. And it was on PBS years ago, and it's about the Manhattan Project and Oppenheimer specifically. And there's the famous physicist, Freeman Dyson, at Princeton Institute for Advanced Study. I think he's in his 90s now. He's talks about, and it's right in the middle of the documentary when he's talking about the Manhattan Project, and he said Oppenheimer made a Faustian bargain. There's no doubt. He was given by General Groves, gave him unlimited resources to do physics on the grandest scale. And that's what he did. And he said there's no doubt about it. Because, the famous speech that Oppenheimer gave after I am Shiva. Yes, I am death. I am become death. There's sort of this awareness of that. Regardless of what you think, if there was justified or not, I think that Oppenheimer said once this ball kind of started rolling, and I'm paraphrasing here, I was given, these unlimited resources by the United States government to do physics on the grandest scale. It was too much.
And if you think about that deal in your own life and imagine, so I have always, one of the things that I learned along my path was it is nearly impossible to say, this is what I want to become when I grow up.
Yeah.
But it is a lot safer to say, this is a question that I am interested in answering. And that question could be, am I capable of doing X? Am I capable of becoming a marathon runner? Am I smart enough to get into this school that I want? Whatever that is. But the way that you find a life worth living is you have questions that if you discover the answer to them, it's going to make a difference somewhere. And so maybe I don't know, not everyone is capable of thinking about how do I discover the secrets of nuclear fusion.
Yes.
But if you pursue any question that you have so deeply, are you making a Faustian deal? If you pursue nothing, you'll get nowhere. But what do you think?
I'll give you an example. This is something that I tend to think, I try to think very deeply about, because these situations will come up in all of our lives. I genuinely.
If you're doing anything that matters at all, it will come up. Yeah.
And this is the funny thing. It's not this clear example where Mephistopheles is standing at your door with the contract to sell you. It's something small. And it builds. For me, I thought a lot about it because I'm in the cannabis industry. Now, and this is something I thought deeply about. I don't have any issue with it. What I have an issue, and the investments...
Meaning that you don't have an issue, that you don't think it's going to be you're not creating Pottersville to sit on your own mountain of money.
And I think the research genuinely reflects that this is not, the biggest argument against it is the gateway drug theory. I don't, from everything I've seen, it does not hold water. Again, take it with a grain of salt. I have an economic interest.
So, I am well schooled in the game of doing what ifs because I represented a biotech company and would go out and talk about GMOs, and you can only say what we have evidence that it does this, and that we have evidence that it kind of doesn't do that, but we don't know that, right? And so in the biotech world, they would be like, well, you don't know that it doesn't cause autism, so maybe we shouldn't eat GMOs. You could look at something like cannabis and say, well, if we put it on a grand national scale, maybe it causes infertility. And you have a whole bunch of people that have lost their access to have children because of that. Let's imagine a scenario where that comes true. So then do you feel bad?
Sure. I think I probably would. I'll give you a counterexample, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
So I love Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. I love watching from the Berkshire Hathaway. Love watching
the greatest marketing. They are marketers. They are brilliant.
They really are that. If you watch their annual meeting or the past 5 years, you have people that buy, I would assume buy some B shares of Berkshire Hathaway, and then they are able to get a question. And it's always, every meeting, it's about Coca-Cola and diabetes, because Berkshire Hathaway is I think the largest shareholder of Coca-Cola. And I genuinely, this is something I genuinely believe. Oftentimes, and I'm essentially paraphrasing what Charlie Munger, the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, said, is these people that come up and complain, which they have every right to do.
They're owners of the company.
Yeah. What they don't do is they don't judge the benefits by the detriments, or the detriments by the benefits, rather. And sure, there are people that develop type 2 diabetes because they're consuming too much sugar, and it could be in the form of Coca-Cola. Does that mean we shouldn't have Coca-Cola? Some people say yes. I don't. I think the benefits of... I don't drink regular Coca-Cola. I love Diet Coke. I love Diet Cherry Coke especially. I think the amount of people they employ is absolutely fabulous. And this is something I've thought people do. Do I think it's healthy that there are people that drink 8 Coca-Cola cans of Coca-Cola a day? No. I think it's a travesty.
But you wouldn't make it so nobody else can have Coca-Cola. So this is a very libertarian concept of saying, hey, I want to make it available to anybody that wants to. People that are irresponsible, that's on them, not the company.
I don't even know that that's what I'm saying. Okay. I'm saying that there are people, and I've heard this, they genuinely say, we shouldn't have these types of products, and they shouldn't be made. They'll go to that extreme. Now, I think there's very few people that say it, but I've met them that will say that they shouldn't be able to advertise, or that you shouldn't be able to consume these products if you're under 18.
Shouldn't be able to sponsor the high schools football scoreboard,
right?
In order to be able to have a contract to sell Coca-Cola in the schools.
I simply don't, and this is why I think things are much simpler in cannabis. I would have a real problem if and this whole time we've sort of been focused, there's been this sort of implicit focus on cannabis in general and sort of recreational cannabis. I have no doubt, and especially with the opioid crisis, that medical cannabis has incredible benefits for people from a pain management perspective. But let's say we're talking about recreational cannabis. I am not a dyed-in-the-wool libertarian who thinks that there should be marketing to
should you be able to sell it at a high school basketball game concession stand?
I'm not, I think, and listen, I could have that debate with other libertarians, but I think, like anything, there are shades of gray. I think it's reasonable, to say that there shouldn't be regulations on this industry, and I absolutely believe that.
Yeah, the thing about libertarians that is an interesting concept is that many of them come at it almost like the people that are on the left. that are like, let's just go to the absolute extreme. Let's just do 100% socialism. Well, the people in the libertarian system are like, we should just tear everything down and then we'll build from scratch. Instead of saying probably the best way to do it is to take the most stable society and then just take off one rule. Yeah. And if it's better, then we'll take off another rule. Yeah. And allow as many of these little incubators that we were talking about before, these cities or states, to try things. And as they figured out which laws to take off, let's do that too.
It's a hard, I mean, you know this. I know this in my own personal experience. So if you give me something, or if I'm used to something, and you take it away from me, I am not going to be happy.
Oh yeah, loss aversion is way more intense. I agree. So one of the things I wanted to return to was you're in the grow room, right? And you've got the little baby plants, and then you've got the big plants. Yeah. But there are a bunch of people roaming around there. Yeah. Who all works in cannabis? Because if one of my listeners has an 18-year-old kid that says, I'm going out to Colorado to start my career in cannabis, are they nuts? Are they hippies? Is there work out there that's worthwhile for them to be doing?
Oh, absolutely.
So let's hear that.
So if you want to be in the cannabis industry, I give very different advice to someone that wants to go work in the cannabis industry versus someone that wants to invest in it. If you want to go work in it, there is a plethora of opportunities available for sophisticated and highly intelligent people. And this gets into my investment philosophy. I look at industries that other people, for whatever reason, may have stepped away from, are not interested in, that there may be something of a stain on it that doesn't violate my own personal morals. That appeals to me. And I have no doubt, in cannabis, it's almost hard to believe this now because it's become, just in the past couple of years, I've never really seen, I was talking about this with some professors of mine from business school, the transformation of an industry in just a couple of years, from non-mainstream to mainstream. There are a plethora of opportunities for for people. Whether you're blue collar, white collar, you work in law, you have agricultural experience. There are a plethora of opportunities.
Like what?
If you wanted to work if you just want to learn about the industry and you want to work in a grow facility, and see how cannabis, when I say grow facility, I'm talking about a cultivation facility. There are
one of those concrete buildings out in Las Vegas. And so you could show up there and fill out an online application. Sure. And then what type of work would you be doing?
You could do trimming, meaning
there's flower on there and you're clipping it off and making it so people have something to smoke.
You could, let's say you're an engineer or software developer, there are, as this industry goes mainstream and, like anything, it's understanding what your consumers want, building applications or building on data collection, to understand as much about what your consumers want. Certainly in marketing, that's really the future.
Oh, I wouldn't even have thought about that, about how much it is marketing, because you're buying a green flower and somebody's got to tell you this is what it tastes like, this is what it smells like, this is what it's going to do to you psychologically, this is how healthy it is or not healthy. Yeah, that's really interesting. Come to this store.
Exactly. And the biggest, this is I'm getting inside here, but I think it'll be valuable, is the retail component of cannabis is getting consumers in, getting them what they want, and getting them out, and operating that efficiently. The issue is that you're having people come in that aren't educated about the product. So how do you educate them while also maintaining operational efficiency?
Particularly if you're in Las Vegas and it's a tourist business, so these people don't have the thing that they're just looking for, whatever the varieties are.
That's so, and you're in it. You're in part. Even more insight here is this industry because of the state by state regulations, because it's not legal at the federal level. It's very fragmented, and you can go to certain places like the Bay Area where you see incredible operational efficiency. versus newer markets where there's, less efficiency. And then also back to complexity. What may work in the Bay Area doesn't necessarily translate to Illinois or Massachusetts or...
So that's interesting, because I was making the comparison to something like McDonald's, right? Where McDonald's gets to get out ahead, one, because they have food that people enjoy eating, but then two, their operating model is so efficient they can get people in and out super, super fast.
I'm smiling here because this is something I've talked with a very, very, very successful company about. And they brought up McDonald's, and they have an interesting... So I'll give you some idea here. I think the last I looked, and I could be wrong, but the average dispensary does something like 3.7 million a year in top line revenue, 3.7 to 4 million.
They must have jacked up the space costs of Las Vegas insanely.
Well, this is across the country. There's a company I know of that has a retail location that does over 20 million in top line revenue out of 1,000 square feet.
Is that like the Bass Pro of cannabis?
It's pretty remarkable. And what they've done is they are, without going into too much detail, they're able to, they've got a system to where they're a mix of McDonald's and the Apple Store. Apple Store is all upsell. McDonald's is no upsell. It's like, okay, you want a number 2? Great. Get you your number 2 out the door. Volume.
Right.
Apple Store is all, I think they have the highest sales per square foot. They're at like $6,000. When we talk about companies that have reported it. This company's a little bit of a mix. And they have queues for, one group that knows exactly what they want, and the other, and they've got a technological advantage here that allows them to kind of separate their customers.
Really?
Yeah.
Because in Las Vegas, you have to show up and you have to give them your ID.
This company isn't in Las Vegas.
Oh, well, and that's like a weird thing, right? So, and there's probably a whole bunch of business around that is in Las Vegas, because you have to tell them who you are and put it all down. There's people that are taking those photos and running the background check on the, I totally understand. I'm really fascinated by this idea of how many people there are to work in it, because, coming from agriculture, there are breeders, and the breeding is real serious in cannabis, because whoever can find one that grows not just higher yields, but gives you the psychotropic effects that you actually want. So is it more calming? Is it going to rattle? Is it going to bring you up? Is it going to do all these things? So this is breeding. And then you've got, experienced people that can taste the terroir of the land and how this is all. But then you also have, you were talking about computer scientists to do web development, but also I would imagine that's going to go in with breeding and supply chain and all of this. This is it really is adding a whole new branch to the economy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. And it's, I think if you want to build a career or you want to get in an industry where you have an opportunity to start at the ground, really kind of the ground floor, it's a great industry to start, because I believe that the industry itself has staying power.
Is it a wholesome industry? I mean, if somebody found out their kid went to 2 years of technical college to get some, automated greenhouse education, they go out to wherever is legal to grow. Are they hanging around with a bunch of bums?
I can say this wholeheartedly. Some of the people I've worked with in cannabis are the best people I've ever met. Not just in terms of from a professional experience, which they have been, but I'm talking about on a personal level, is honest. Now, it's anecdotal evidence. Take it for what it's worth.
Yeah, because there's got to be bums, right? There's guys that are showing up with their man buns on that are stoned all day long and aren't doing anything other than playing video games when they get done trimming all day.
This is the interesting thing, is that if your goal is to sit around and you say, I want to get into the cannabis industry so I can smoke marijuana and smoke cannabis all day, and have fun. It is not the industry for you. You shouldn't, because it's the people that are going to succeed in this are the ones that have discipline, that take it seriously and put their heart and soul into it.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's not any profound wisdom. I think that's anything. if you really want to succeed, you got to work really, really hard.
And the discipline part, going back, because we didn't actually finish the story of you held back, you waited, and then people hit the wall, and you were there to buy up their
well,
leftovers.
It was more than anything. It was just managing cost. We didn't incur those costs by having a full harvest and operating. And I have to. That's the difference. Was the difference for us?
How long did you wait before you started growing?
Gosh, let me think about this. You want to know? So we sold in August. We sold the entire facility in August of 2018. We had not yet had our full harvest, our first full harvest. And any really successful investor, again, I'm not taking any credit for this. This is, rather be lucky than right. But, I like to think that there was some effort we put into this.
I mean, there's no doubt, because you were there with us, and I think maybe 20% of the greenhouse was full. Yeah. And I know even myself, I was a little bit like, I wanted to see the entire thing filled with cannabis. And you were like, we're growing this right here. We're doing practice runs. We're getting better at drying. We're doing, and you didn't have, you had a few people around. There were busy bees around there, but it wasn't loaded down with people sitting on their phones waiting for something to do.
Yeah. And it was, and I'll step back. The reason for this, for our investment in this industry, was that the worst case scenario, we thought that there were moats around these licenses. The license for a dispensary, for a grow, for processing, especially in a city like Las Vegas and a state like Nevada. When I say moat, I'm talking about a competitive advantage in that there would be value in those licenses in and of themselves. And if you had a fully built facility, and the opportunity came where someone wanted to buy it, that there would be a value proposition there, and that you would have a significant return on investment. I think that ultimately turned out to be true. There are states where...
What did M. Hardeen end up buying then? Because you hadn't had a full harvest, so you had the license and you had the facility. The
facility was really the license, but ultimately the facility and the ability to produce high grade, high quality cannabis out of that facility was what they bought. And I think it was a good investment for them, because I think that what they took was what would be a linear investment for us, and it turned out to be an exponential. They could, through their operational efficiencies and also scale, could make that an exponential, investment, because ultimately the consolidation that's happened in the past 3 years is unprecedented. And I don't say that. I mean that literally is unprecedented. I don't know. I've talked about this with professional economists and people that have, professors of business at elite universities who said, I can't think of other examples where you've seen an industry. And this is, I don't think it's specific to cannabis. I think we're in a world now where things happen much faster, and reaching efficiency is getting easier. I mean, if you think about this,
oh man, that sounds counterintuitive. Reaching efficiency, because to me it would seem like the low-hanging fruit is done. The guy that, let's just take it to agriculture, the guy that was able to build a better diesel engine, those days are over, because they're not trying to build a better diesel engine. They're trying to build GPS guided, precision.
I think we're saying the same thing in that applies, their technological expertise now applies to this, and the way we're all progressing and the way things progress in general, it's just much, much faster.
That's true.
Yeah. And now I think that because of the industry itself, because of the legality, there's more room for for technological advances and discoveries in cannabis.
And you won't have one monolith that comes in and says, all right, now we're producing just for commodity. By having state by state, you get a bunch of competition. So that brings me to a question about St. Louis, Missouri, but it's actually approachable to any state that you're looking at. So Missouri is now medical state, and starting, I think, what is it, in the beginning of January, it's legal in the state of Illinois recreationally, correct?
I think so, yeah.
And so what is going on right now? Who is vying for what position? What are they jockeying for? How is this going to play out in the state of Missouri?
Well, right now there's applications are being, people are going to apply for applications for cultivation, processing, dispensary, medical cannabis operators licenses, and that'll happen. I think the deadline's in the middle of August, and so it's coming up. And then there will be a process by where, the state determines who are viable candidates to start growing,
Candidates is a good name. Exactly. I like that. The candidates
who will be viable candidates to be operators in the industry and caregivers, and then they'll make their decisions, and then
you see the same thing going on where there'll be potential for the people that drove the car too fast or ran the engine too hot to slam into the wall.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's absolutely possible.
Who should people be keeping their eye on? What are the opportunities really for somebody if they're serious, they're disciplined, they want to get in on what's going to happen in this state? Where would you suggest they look?
I think that there's a ton of opportunity on the picks and shovels side of this industry, because I think that as the industry progresses outside of the state of Missouri, and as it becomes more efficient, that trying to run a mom and pop shop with limited capital in the state or anywhere, I think it's going to be incredibly difficult. I think.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about the efficiencies that are going to need to happen with just having clean facilities that don't get, if you start growing in Missouri, you do have a mites problem.
Yes.
You can have rusts and different types of fungus. I'm wondering if there'll be farmers or people that were in the swine industry or the poultry industry that'll start saying, I know how to keep a facility clean and I don't know necessarily how to grow cannabis, but I can bring this expertise to the table in a way that maybe hasn't been brought yet.
It's pretty interesting to think about, and this is what's so funny about it. And I think it was John Kenneth Galbraith who said this, that there are two types of forecasters: those who don't know and those who don't know they don't know. And I've seen the way things play out on a state-by-state basis in this industry. It's just remarkable. The future is the variables at play and the complexity of everything. I genuinely, the future is unknowable. And I think, now that doesn't mean you don't do any planning. I think collecting as much information, as much data as you can, but to say that this is going to be the same as industry X for anyone is a really, really dangerous assumption.
Yeah, you're missing the opportunity to look at it for what it really is, and then be able to make smart decisions.
Yeah.
So you travel all the time. Yeah. You said you got a partner down in Texas. Yeah. You were just doing this operation out in Las Vegas. If you didn't have family in St. Louis, would this city be a good place to be doing business? Or no?
I love this city. I think it's a fabulous city. I think there's I
wasn't sure what you were going to say there.
Yeah. No, I think, I went to business school here. I went to Olin, Washington University, and had a phenomenal experience. I tend to think that this is a great city, and that there's, and this is my personality in general, is that and I would take this as a compliment. My professor said something to me, my accounting professor, Ron King at Olin. And I took this, he goes, you strike me as the type of person who doesn't care what anybody thinks.
Oh, I think that's 100% true.
And I tend to,
I could have told you that.
Thanks.
That might have been in my introduction.
And I take that as a compliment, because it's, and we've talked about that. We both love the book 0 to 1.
Oh yeah,
by
Peter Thiel.
And there are things I agree with a lot of what Peter Thiel said, and there are things I don't agree with. But there's something he said that I found fascinating, is that if you look at people, MBA, and I got my MBA recently. A lot of them, especially, he brought up Harvard. The impulse is to jump into the hot sector at exactly the wrong time.
Right.
In 2000 was all tech. In 2007, it was all real estate, private equity, and I think you can extrapolate that on a wider basis. Is that impulse to do what everyone else is doing is incredibly, and I feel it.
You go to where the wave is going to be, not where the wave is right now. Because if you go to where the wave is right now, it's going to crash over. You won't even get there in time.
Yeah, and it's it's a powerful impulse. So I'm not. Listen, I've been guilty of relenting to it myself, but I think I try to do a pretty good job of backing off of that. And also, I'm just weird, so it makes it a little bit easier to just be different if you're a natural weirdo. But that's why I think, there's emphasis on, the startup model. I mean, startups are great, but if you look at the success rate of a lot of them, it's not that.
Right.
Yeah. And ultimately, I think people should do, what they're passionate about. I know that sounds sort of trite and glib, and I like this is a long way of me saying that I like the Midwest. I love St. Louis. I love the work ethic here. And I think that there's an untapped potential here. I think there are some significant changes that have to be made. I think that this is, and I'll just be very direct here. I think that the impulse for a lot of people is to try to, if you end up trying to be the Silicon Valley of the Midwest, you end up being the nothing of nowhere.
Right. If you follow the model where you say, we're going to try and be tech, just like Silicon Valley, you're missing the fact that you're not Silicon Valley.
Right. And there's also things that St. Louis has that...
the largest, most important navigable waterway on the planet runs right past our front door.
Yeah. And exactly. And cities have specific resources that make them viable for certain things. And do I think that people should say, I'm going to relocate St. Louis to build the next great social media app? I mean, no, I don't think. I think there's... and listen, this is not an area of expertise for me.
What is the area that you think we do have that's particularly
Sounds like
good?
life sciences.
Oh yeah,
ag. Ag, life sciences. It's pretty compelling. And
the plant. So that's a great. So there's that statistic of like we have more plant biologists per capita here than anywhere else in the world. But even if you didn't have that, the density of young people that have just finished graduate level programs that are now capable of doing breeding on a scale that was literally unimaginable just a few years ago. You have a whole bunch of them here.
Yeah.
The company's just changed over. It went from being Monsanto to being Bayer.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of people that said, you know what? I thought I knew the landscape when it was Monsanto. I don't know what it's going to be with Bayer. I'm going to try my own thing. Mm-hmm. And so there is a huge number of people at the exact same moment that cannabis is going to come online. I think it's going to be, it has the potential to be enormous.
Yeah, I think there's an incredible opportunity there. Will it shake out? I don't know. There's a ton of different factors, but I think there's absolutely opportunity there.
So, what are you up to now? Where are you spending most of your time?
I'm all over the place. I spend a lot of time here, St. Louis, Missouri. I spend time out in Nevada. I spend a ton of time out in California.
Where in California?
I've been in L.A., San Diego, Bay Area. It's a ton of time in Colorado. Denver, Colorado Springs, and be a lot more travel. I spent some time in Hawaii recently doing some consulting stuff out there. So
consulting on cannabis business?
Yeah. So the vast majority of what I'm doing now, just from in terms of work, is cannabis. It's essentially my sole focus. And that's, I think, for me, and I was talking about this with a mentor of mine, that, I was like, well, maybe this industry's got some inefficiencies. And he kind of gently suggested that, there's not a ton. I mean, there's some people, and I'm drawn to these people that have, can apply their knowledge and intelligence to a bunch of different industries and be really successful. I'm not as smart as, and I think for most people, it makes sense to kind of specialize. And I'm realizing that more and more. I would love to be, a Charlie Munger or a, Howard Marks or, one of these people that can look at a bunch of different industries and say, okay, this works here. It's just.
Well, I mean, you have clearly established that you were able to take a certain pile of money and turn it into a larger pile of money by doing this. And that is in part with you figuring out who else do I need to have at the table. Yeah. So this then maybe is a great segue to say, if people that have heard this have said, Tony Sansone III is the kind of guy that I enjoy talking with or hearing about, where can people find you to talk with you more?
I guess you could find me on Twitter, Tony Sansone III. Yeah.
So you very, very rarely do stuff, but I got to say, if something I put out there gets a like from you, I'm like, oh, hey, he's out there. He's normally you're running and gunning. So that's great. I'll put a link on there. Yeah. I think that we should plan to get together in a few months when things start panning out in Illinois and they're looking like they're shaping up here in Missouri, and let's have a conversation about
I would love to.
What's going on in the world, because we marked time today and we'll figure out what things happen in the future. But in the meantime, thank you so much for stopping by. This is great. I'm so glad to see you. Tell your dad I said hi.
I will. Thanks.
Well, that's it for this week's interview with Tony Sansone III. I hope you enjoyed it. Next week on the podcast, I have the good fortune of finding an attorney that does class action lawsuits. And this is a topic I am deeply interested in because while I was working at Monsanto and then later Bayer, they were embroiled in a major class action lawsuit about glyphosate. And while I had nothing at all to do with the court case, I have a lot of feelings about the safety of glyphosate. And so it has been absolutely bizarre to me that a giant class action lawsuit could come about, and let alone huge fines like $78 million to $2 billion could be levied against a corporation. So a friend of mine connected me with an attorney that is in class action lawsuits, and he has agreed to stop by the studio. We're going to talk about things like Johnson & Johnson and the baby powder cases, how these cases come about, and whatever else the attorney wants to share with me. It will be an interesting interview, and it'll be one of those where I am coming in with a strong opinion, but trying to keep an open mind about what I can learn. Speaking of keeping an open mind, I'm going to keep with the tradition of letting you know about Twitter followers or Twitter pages that I think are worth following. There's two today that I want to mention. I've mentioned both of these individuals on the podcast before, but if you've never taken the chance to pull out your phone and follow them, this is a great time to get out of the network that you're typically in and jump into a totally different one. So the first one I want to mention is my good friend. You've heard me mention him several times on the podcast. His name is Rob Long, and he goes by Plantimals. Rob and I have actually sat down to do a couple of interviews, and has proven that it's really difficult to interview your friends. But if you want a taste for the intellectual rigor with which Rob brings to all of our conversations offline, and an understanding of really out there topics that you might not ordinarily encounter. So his Twitter feed is Plantimals, and you'll find that's Plantimals. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. You will find everything from geology to conversations about philosophy, and every once in a while, complexity and mathematics. He is a very interesting guy, and if you get to his Twitter feed and you like what you see, always pop into who he is following and look around. They're interesting people to explore. One of the people that Rob introduced me to several years ago, who has now become somebody that has really influenced my thinking on a whole bunch of different domains, is a guy named Joscha Bach. Joscha is an artificial intelligence researcher, and he goes by Plinz, Plinz, on Twitter. And he has an extraordinary Twitter page. It is very different. He's always putting out original thoughts very, very few links. And if he does put a link out there, it is so that he can comment on his perspective on it. He is very open that he is not a normie, that he has a different way of looking at the world. And I think that when you go to his page and you start flipping through some of his tweets, you will see that this is one of those people that is a rare person that without something like social media, you might never encounter. But I am so glad that I did. There are many times in the talks that I've given over the last few years that I have referenced his work, and it's really helped me think about tribal thinking and how people know what they know. So those two people are definitely worth following on Twitter. That's Rob Long, Plantimals, and Joscha Bach, Plins. And I want to give one final shout out to Farm Hats. If you have a chance and you want to see what agriculture looks like, not from that propagandistic commercial point of view, but you want to see something new and different and really how farmers live and work, then I highly recommend checking out the Facebook page, Farm Hats. Thank you so much, Kent Blunier, for sending me that box of stuff. It was great to get. So we'll be back next week with an attorney talking about class action lawsuits. Until then, have a great day and continue to share the podcast. Thanks.